Okay, now that we're all present and accounted for, we'll go ahead and begin the meeting. This is the Ordinance Committee meeting, October 10th, 2017. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Chair Rouse.
Here.
Councilmember Murillo.
Here.
Councilmember Hotchkiss is absent. Alternate Helene Schneider will be sitting in.
Here.
All right, thank you. We have, do we have anybody that wants to speak on items that are not on the agenda, anything that has nothing to do with today? This agenda item, otherwise we'll open and close. Oh, Mr. Dalbello, did you? But it's not about the agenda item? That'll go with the rest of the program then. Yeah, and we'll do the staff report first, please. Mr. Wagner.
Chair Rouse, Council Member, and Madam Mayor. I'm Anthony Wagner with the Santa Barbara Police Department. With me today is Madam Assistant City Attorney Tava Ostringer, as well as Mr. Andrew Vermon, who wears many hats with the city, but he is with Community Development and our project manager. Andrew is the nuts and bolts of the land use stuff, as well as Tava doing majority of the heavy lifting for the staff report. Today we're going to talk about 6 different topics: regulatory history, current state landscape, personal cultivation considerations, local and state control of the operational standards, land use and zoning requirements, addressing the existing local collective model, and then a conclusion and direction to staff and council. First, we'll start with the regulatory history and the current landscape. So as you see, there's an exhaustive history with cannabis dating back to 1996, and as recent as this year, Proposition 215, the Compassionate Use Act, legalized medical marijuana in California in 1996. However, it failed to provide a regulatory framework necessary for effective implementation by law enforcement and immunity from criminal prosecution. The medical marijuana program, the MMPA, which provided a more expansive regulation regarding the possession and use of medical marijuana. The MMPA allowed qualified patients or their primary caregivers to lawfully possess and or cultivate marijuana for personal use. We have the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, also known as MMRSA, established a state licensing program for commercial medical cannabis-related activities, including dispensing and cultivation of cannabis. And then significantly, on November 8th, 2016, a citizen initiative in California, voters approved Proposition 64, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, or the AUMA. The AUMA, at the discretion of a local jurisdiction, can provide for retail sale, cultivation, distribution, production, testing for adult use cannabis and adult use cannabis products. Most significantly, and the new state mandate on July 12, 2017, Senate Bill 94, better known as the Medical Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, or as we will refer to it throughout the presentation as the MAU-CRSA, was enacted to provide a single cohesive licensing scheme for all cannabis-related activities. The MAU-CRSA is the current state governing document for both medical and adult use cannabis commercial activity. It also created the State Bureau of Cannabis Control. So the MAU-CRSA has 2 state licensing categories for commercial activity. There's the A license that pertains to adult use. That adult use stays at 21. And then there's the M license, which adheres to the 1996 Compassionate Use Act. Cannabis component actors will apply at the state level for an A license or an M license, and we will delve into that now. So pursuant to the MAU CRSA, there are several indoor cultivation licenses that would pertain to what could be available in the city of Santa Barbara. Type 1A through Type 5A mainly pertain to an A or an M license, and then according to size, ranging from 500 to 5,000 square feet for your Type 1A license, all the way to greater than 22,000 square foot for a 5A license. And then we get into the non-cultivation licenses. A manufacturing-based state license has two categories based upon solvents used. The California Department of Public Health will limit the number of licenses for manufacturers who use volatile solvents. Testing-based licenses will be able to be tested. Testing-based licenses will be able to test both adult use and medical cannabis. They're going to test for THC, cannabinoids, contaminants, microbiological impurities, and other compounds within state regulatory code. A retail-based license can be further categorized by a traditional storefront with a possible delivery component, and then a non-traditional storefront operation. That would be warehouses making deliveries, similar to Council Member Rouse's concept. And then lastly, a micro business. And then we get to the Type 11 distributor license. So distribution state licenses are responsible for transportation of all the wholesale activity or transportation from one licensed wholesale component to another licensed wholesale component. Lastly, we get into Type 12, which is a micro business. That's not currently expressly stated in the proposed ordinance. However, the Ordinance Committee can make that change if they're so inclined. A micro business would allow a manufacturer, a cultivator, and a retail operation center to exist on the same premise. So a little bit more explained for the MAU-CRSA. The state does not require the local entity to make a distinction between medical and adult use business. Throughout this document, staff has made the determination that the city has the capability of not seeing a difference between medical and adult use and just allowing the entire class. There is an implementation of the state mandated track and trace, so everything will be electronically traced by state mandate from seed throughout the wholesale activity to the market itself. And then eligibility to receive future local state proceeds. We'll discuss that along the way, but it provides for almost 20% from a California Revenue Tax Fund to local municipalities if they provide for all of the cannabis components and if they do not ban outdoor personal cultivation or the retail sale of cannabis.
Excuse me, Mr. Wagner, does
Yes,
track
sir.
and trace from the state include transportation and manifest, that type of thing?
Absolutely, quite stringently. So whatever electronic means the state will enforce come January 2nd will be responsible for the entire process from the leaf to the sale.
Thanks. Mr. Wagner, what was that last thing you just said about outdoor cultivation?
According to the new state mandate that's embedded within MAU-CRSA, there is a fund available to local municipalities should they allow all the components and should they not expressly prohibit outdoor cultivation for personal use.
Thank you.
Now let's go specifically to that personal cultivation consideration. So if we look at Santa Barbara Municipal Code 2887-300, that is cannabis cultivation. And on January 2016, you all ensured that a qualified patient could cultivate as much as 100 square foot of medical marijuana, either indoors or outdoors, but for personal use only, meaning that you couldn't sell your product to anybody else. It could only occur within a residence or within the premise of the residence, on the premise of the residence. And then, of course, commercial cannabis cultivation was prohibited. But this is, in fact, in conflict with the new state mandate, MAUCRSA. The mandate says that you only can have, the state mandate says you only can have 6 plants. If you think about 100 square foot, 5 square foot per plant, that exceeds what the state law would be. State law being 6 plants only. And then additional considerations in amending the personal cultivation ordinance. The state does mandate localities allow personal cultivation, but the city can regulate indoor or outdoor, but not prohibit it in its entirety. It may prohibit outdoor, but we do have those state consequences that council member alluded to. If we do not allow outdoor cultivation for personal use, we are not privy to future state funds, should those state funds be available in the future.
Excuse me, Ms. Snyder has a question.
So just to clarify, the outdoor cultivation use for personal use, it's still a maximum of 6 plants. Do they have a limitation of how big or small those plants can be, or is it just 6 plants?
6 plants does not necessarily connotate canopy size. I imagine the better growers would be able to have a greater harvest on that one plant, but think of it as per stalk of cannabis. So currently the city allows 100 square foot, which is in conflict with the state mandate. The state mandate says you only can have 6 plants, regardless of your capability of having a canopy size that would be large for those 6 plants.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And now we'll go to local and state control of the operational standards. The state is in the process of developing emergency regulatory standards for all the components, but they're vacillating back and forth between public comment and when that deadline will be. So we can't guarantee at this moment in time what those state regulatory standards will be. That's why it will be in our best interest to develop our own regulatory standards. So the state does allow for a dual state locality regulatory system, and that would be very similar to how alcohol is governed in the state of California. The Alcoholic Beverage Control Act does allow for local consideration or local control that would be embedded within our land use development code, and this allows for almost an identical principle for local control. Now, if you would regulate these businesses, you could control not only the operational standards, but zoning and distance requirements. You can set a maximum per component, and you can enforce the local ordinance independent of having to solely rely on state enforcement. This does ensure that our city can provide a robust operational control within the industry and promote the best practices that we all hope to achieve. Now, we'd like you to consider adopting Santa Barbara Municipal Code 9.44. which would be the Commercial Cannabis Business Regulation. It would identify the business category, the definition, the number, and the permit for the local operational standards. That would be for indoor cultivation, manufacturing and production, testing, wholesale distribution and storage, and then retail sale, whether that be storefront or delivery only. But keep in mind that the state does not require that the locality distinguish between medical or adult use. Continuing your consideration for Santa Barbara Municipal Code 9.44, it would implement robust public health and safety measures, inclusive of background and ownership requirements, a security plan, record-keeping protocols, component-specific safety and operational standards. It would set distance requirements from sensitive receptors, and it would craft inspection and enforcement protocols that would allow for both criminal and civil penalties. Now, in continuing to consider adopting Santa Barbara Municipal Code 9.44, it would confirm a fair and thorough administrative process. It would ensure local compliance with all of these new state mandates, and it would create a phased selection and application process. Going through those phases, we identified 3 phases. Phase 1 would set a priority application deadline of February 28, 2018. Phase 2 would give the city administrator the opportunity to select the most qualified candidates to grant local permit authority. And then Phase 3, the component actor would submit that local approval to the state for a temporary state license. Mind you, the state will be granting temporary state licenses that last about 4 months and with a 90-day window in the future, and then solidify more permanent licenses thereafter at the state level. So staff would like you to consider annual compliance and monitoring fees. It would establish an annual fee imposed on each component to regularly monitor local ordinance compliance. You all would set that fee according to council resolution. This would be modeled after our neighbor. The city of Ventura has a compliance officer fee-based mechanism for alcohol outlets. It ensures perpetuity compliance of those performance standards and promotes public health and safety and education and community engagements. It's of interest to note that there are 19 different California jurisdictions that currently collect a fee-based mechanism for compliance. Normally that's attached to alcohol and tobacco, but we could use the same standard to regulate alcohol and tobacco with this compliance fee for our retailers here. And next, let's go to land use and zoning requirements. So staff would like you to consider amending Title 30 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, which would limit the location of commercial cannabis businesses to within the manufacturing industrial zone in the city for storefront retail sales, retail delivery only, manufacture, distribution, testing, and indoor cultivation. This would allow storefront retail sales of cannabis to occur within a commercial general zone within the city, and I want to provide for a correction, commercial restricted zone. I said retail. So commercial restricted zone within the city. This is what that would look like. So the green spaces are the commercial zoning considerations, and the orange space would be the manufacturing zone that the wholesale portions would be able to operate in. Now let's address the existing local collective model. I'll turn this particular portion of the slide over to our city attorney to explain where we've been and how we have existing collectives with this map.
Good afternoon, Chair Rouse, council members, Mayor. The city presently allows 3 medical marijuana dispensaries. We have 3 issued permits. 1 permit for the State Street has been revoked and it's currently on appeal. It'll be before you in November. There is another dispensary that has a permit application in place, and that is for the Mission Street location, and that has not yet gone to the staff hearing officer, but it could be the 3rd permit if the State Street dispensary is revoked. The ordinance, as presently drafted, only allows for the collective model and cooperative model of cultivation and distribution. That's reflective of the Medical Marijuana Program Act and the Compassionate Use Act. Since the changes that have occurred under the MAU CRSA, there's no longer the requirement for the cooperative model. So what we're proposing is an amendment to what was Chapter 2880, but now with the implementation of the new zoning ordinance, you'll find that it's in 3185 250. So what we would propose is to remove the collective and cooperative requirement, which would allow the existing dispensaries, 3 existing dispensaries, to obtain a M license from the state and continue to operate. However, we are proposing that because the existing ordinance is somewhat outdated and doesn't have the robust controls that we're putting into the new proposed ordinance, that the existing 3 would then be considered legal non-conforming, and we would be repealing the existing ordinance, and they would continue to operate under the existing ordinance, but any new dispensaries, whether they be medical or just for adult use, would occur under 9.44.
So, Ms. Alternate, so I can be clear, that's not converting medical to general sale recreational, right?
No, we are not proposing converting them. If the existing dispensaries wanted to be considered under the new ordinance, they would have to apply just like everyone else.
Thank you.
So just to reiterate, the collective style was required when you passed that in 2010. It's now outdated and in conflict with the MAU CRSA. That amendment that Ms. Teva had alluded to would also allow cultivation of cannabis to occur outside of the tri-counties to more easily comply with wholesale purchase from licensed cultivators. So staff would like you to consider that the existing code does not contain the robust and detailed regulations like that being proposed. So we'd also request that you consider repealing 185 250. The existing medical dispensaries can operate under the old provision as legally non-conforming. And lastly, let's go to our conclusion and your direction to staff and council. Number 1, staff recommends for personal cultivation that the Ordinance Committee recommend to the full council amending Section 30, 185, 110 to allow for indoor cultivation of up to 6 cannabis plants for personal use within a private residence or its accessory structure by persons 21 years of age or older within any zone of the city, and prohibit outdoor cultivation of cannabis for personal use. Next, staff would recommend for the regulatory ordinance that the Ordinance Committee recommend to the full council adoption of new Chapter 44 within Title IX of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code to regulate medical and adult use commercial cannabis businesses, which includes retail sales, distribution, testing, manufacturing, and indoor cannabis cultivation. Moreover, recommend the number per individual business categories. And lastly, recommend staff draft a council resolution to set an annual compliance and monitoring fee for commercial cannabis businesses. Lastly, staff recommendation for the adult use ordinance, that the Ordinance Committee recommend to the full City Council amending Title 30 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code to limit the location of commercial cannabis businesses, including storefront and retail sales, retail delivery only, manufacture, distribution, testing, and indoor cultivation to within the MI zone, but also allow for storefront retail sales of cannabis to occur within the CG and CR zone. Also, direct staff to investigate, or not, the future feasibility of commercial cannabis businesses being placed in the airport manufacturing zone, which would in fact require an amendment to the airport-specific plan that staff does not believe that we could achieve that by the end of this year. And I guess this is the last one for the local collective model that the Ordinance Committee recommended the full City Council amending 185-250 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, which is the ordinance number 5526, medical cannabis dispensaries, to remove the requirement that medical cannabis dispensaries operate under a collective or cooperative model, and subsequently repeal 185-250 so that medical cannabis dispensaries with issued permits become legal nonconforming. That completes staff's presentation.
Thank you. We have some questions from the committee. Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wagner, can we go back to slide 29 and the recommendation to prohibit outdoor cultivation of cannabis for personal use? Why are you recommending that?
I believe there are ramifications to growing cannabis outdoors in a close-knit residential environment to where that has the capability of negatively impacting the enjoyment of your neighbor when they're potentially smelling these 6 plants. Granted, these 6 plants only smell 2 weeks out of the grow cycle. It is profuse and can lead to a real dissatisfaction of neighbors who are next to someone who chooses to grow those 6 plants outdoors in close proximity to their neighbor.
Right. Well, I'm glad we're going to have that discussion. I'd like to hear what the public has to say about that. And I'm hoping there's some news reporters that will light up all of these issues. I think sorry, I didn't mean that.
It's inevitable.
We're gonna be full of puns all day. You know it's gonna happen. Just a warning.
The mayor has a better sense of humor than me, I have to say, because it's someone's backyard, and most people have enclosed backyards. And if you're saying it's 2 weeks, that doesn't seem like a terribly long time. I want the public to weigh in on that. It seems like we're decriminalizing marijuana and growing it, in your garden with your squash and your tomatoes and your flowers. It kind of seems natural, and I would like that to be a topic that we discuss further. I think it would also reduce people going to the black market, because I'm assuming the black market will continue even as we try to absorb these laws into our society and into our behaviors. And if someone can grow what they need for medicine or otherwise, that's economical for them. No offense to the people who are going to be selling it. So I'd like that to be something that we talk about and that we forward to the council. And I know that we're under a deadline.
Under the question part, though, still, because we need to get public comment, please. If you would.
Very good. I mean, I just wanted to say that we should move this to the council today because we're looking at the deadline of January 1st. Let me gather my thoughts then. You interrupted my train of thought, so
All right.
thanks.
All right, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Just so my colleagues know and others, I attended a State of Cannabis conference a couple of weeks ago and speaking on a panel about the patchwork of local laws, but I think I learned more than I was able to convey to the group. The people there included Lori Ajax from the state, who's overseeing all of the licensing process, people from the Department of Agriculture, from the state, we had a number of people, my point being, two things. One, the imperativeness of trying to get something on the books here before January, just what's happening with the state, but also things might come up that I might share that came from that conference. But my question, two things along the line also about cultivation. So if I'm understanding, if we were to prohibit outdoor cultivation for personal use, we would automatically be prohibited from applying or be qualified to apply for state funding. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. That would be one of the only triggers that would prohibit us from receiving those state proceeds in the future.
Okay. So if we wanted to, the commercial cannabis limited to indoor cultivation, that does not trigger the concern with the state grants, just personal?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And does the state law allow us, if we were to look at outdoor cultivation for personal use, to enforce some odor control mechanisms or anything like that?
I would defer to the city attorney.
Madam Mayor, we are allowed to reasonably regulate it, so if there is a way to regulate outdoor smell of cannabis, yes, we could try and find some mechanism
one of
to
the
do that.
things, for example, at this conference was about just this and the idea of rotating the 6 plants so that only one is budding at a time, which is what creates the smell, and if there's a way to help, guidelines or whatever to put the one that's budding inside. I mean, so those are the kind of things, but I just wanted to ask about the state funding. And then I didn't know if I'm reading something incorrectly or not. So on page 48, attachment 2, 9.44.300. So we're allowing, this is about commercial, there's still commercial cultivation allowed just indoor, correct? For commercial purposes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So actually where I really want to go to is attachment 3, page 15, when it talks about land use regulations, manufacturing zones, which is where we would allow those commercial cultivation uses. What it says is personal cannabis cultivation. So, but are we talking about commercial cannabis cultivation or just personal? If you look at the list there, because it makes the impression. Yeah.
Madam Mayor, that may be one of the few questions I can answer. If you look at page 14, and I apologize, this is black and white, at the very top of table 30.30.020 is commercial cannabis business, and that's the broad umbrella that would encompass manufacturing zone cultivation.
That would, okay, all right. So it can also allow personal cannabis cultivation in the M1 zone is what I'm seeing on page 15. I just didn't know if there was an error here accidentally to make it look like we are prohibiting.
That is an issue, and what I recall of the staff debate, and there may be more discussion from other staff about this, is that we've typically tracked the residential character of the use rather than the zoning district. And I believe that's how the 100 square foot ordinance was developed.
That's correct. When we developed the 100 square foot, in which we've tried to model this one, we were recognizing that there might be a lawful dwelling unit within an M1 or an MI zone.
Okay, well that makes sense then. As long as the commercial cannabis business includes the cultivation item within M1, we're not saying two things in the ordinance and then the table. That was just where my confusion was. I think those are all my
With regards to
questions.
personal cultivation, I would
Yep.
just remind the committee that it's not one grow cycle, it's between 5 to 8 grow cycles annually. So this would be every 8 to 10 weeks, and then 2 weeks of that smell.
Okay, couple
Thanks.
quick questions, Mr. Wagner. You done, Madam Mayor?
No, I'm done.
Yeah. So if we were to adopt 944 per staff recommendations, then we would have to repeal whatever the prohibition was on commercial growth within the city?
You would have that capability. I believe your prohibition lasts until September of 2018. So you would take action at the council level.
All right. And next thing was about on slide 30, you talked about the different zones, the CG and the CR. So that would include El Pueblo Viejo in terms of an area that you would be able to have a dispensary?
I would refer to our Mr. Berman, who is our land use
Because
expert
I remember
for the
this
zones.
discussion when they did the medical zoning in the first place. And that was one of the first things to get off the list. So, Mr. Berman.
Mr. Chair and committee members, that's correct. At the moment, the staff's recommendation would be to include or to permit cannabis dispensary use in any commercial zone without restriction to design overlay districts or anything like that. That's something that can be discussed and amended or recommended to bring back to Ordinance Committee or to bring to City Council at a later date. But that's in order to make sure that we were providing for the dispensary across the city rather than just putting it in any one location. We're taking a broad approach in terms of commercial zones.
All right, very good. Well, if there are no further questions from committee, we'll go to public
I'd like
comment.
to hear from the public. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Very good. We'll do public comment then. We have 2 minutes per speaker. And please stay to that. So our first speaker will be Pete DeBello.
Okay. Chair and Councilman Rouse and Mayor Schneider and Councilwoman Kathy Murillo. My name is Pete Del Bello, and I'm a Santa Barbara native. Please forgive my appearance. I spent so much time reviewing the ordinances that I left my hat at home. So now the ordinance says that there can be a maximum of 3 medical marijuana dispensaries in Santa Barbara. There are already permits for dispensaries on Delavina and Melpis. Ryan Howe and the Melpis dispensary has been a terrible neighbor. And he shouldn't be trying to amend a permit that he should have never received in the first place. Before he has even opened this dispensary, it is disrespectful to the community, the mayor and city council, and the planning commission and planning department. There is much more that I can say, and staff hearing officer Susan Reardon is concerned. And just to, I know was mentioned earlier, just to confirm that their Upper State Street wants to appeal the revoked permit before the mayor and city council. And then West Mission Street is in the early stages of the planning process. So naturally that's a potential for 4 dispensaries when the ordinance clearly states that only 3 dispensaries are allowed. So I just wanted to, to confirm that if, you know, that one might get left out in the cold, for lack of better words. And so that's what I wanted to bring to your attention, and thank you for your time and kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be, I'm not going to try this last name. Zahar is the first name? Thank you.
So speaking of, hi council members, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and looking at this whole program. I was one of the first applicants that was in round 1, and unfortunately I didn't get the opportunity to be an investor, an actual dispensary owner out here. I was looking at the ordinances and I would like to have it all approved if you guys can, and continue to be an investor out here and put resources and time into this. We currently manage and run a dispensary out in LA. So we know we play the game with the ordinances, with the city, and make sure we follow the rules and the regulations. We go through our audits. We go through everything that we need to go through. And LA is a little challenging place, but we get to do it the right way. We just acquired a piece of property in Port Hueneme where we're actually going ahead and going through the CA application process and going through that process currently. So we just want to keep the support for the cannabis space in Santa Barbara and would love to help in any way possible.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Victor Trujillo.
Good afternoon, Council. How you guys doing? It is really great and amazing that you guys are testing our cannabis products. But one thing that, that should be tested is also our food, fast food products, GMOs. And another thing mainly I came here to speak to you guys about is doing some pop-up cannabis events. I have a few restaurants here in downtown and Goleta that would like to participate in pop-up cannabis events with the use of CBDs, the non-psychoactive effect. So we'd be having THC, the cannabinoids, and also CBDs, the medicinal side with the non-psychoactive effect. We have everything ready to go. The only thing that is stopping us is the restaurant owners. They are scared they're going to get shut down, or they're just scared because of the laws currently. But the way we're operating is approved, for that 1 to 2 hours, and some type of letter of approval, or anything that would help us and the community to heal themselves, for all their medicinal needs. And all this is organic, non-GMO medicine. So do I have your guys' approval to do pop-up cannabis events here in Santa Barbara?
This isn't a discussion, you're just speaking today.
Yeah, I'm asking you a question.
We wait till after public comment, and then we'll decide on things afterwards.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Ryan Howe.
Hello, Mayor Schneider, Chairman Rouse, and Councilperson Murillo. How are you today? Thanks for giving me 2 minutes to speak. I prepared a document after a couple of discussions that I had with Mr. Wagner. I emailed it out to pretty much everybody that I could think of, but just wanted to say first thank you to the staff and to you guys for doing this. You're leading the way, and we're all in the cannabis industry very excited. One thing that I'd ask you to pay special attention to is the manufacturing area. It's the biggest thing in our business right now, and it's probably the biggest way right now that the city can realize tax revenue. I've brought some handouts with me. If you'd all like a copy, I can hand it to you. We did a proposed tax table for the city. I mean, permitting 6 of these sites could literally drive millions in tax revenue for the city. So just something to think about, focus on, and again, thank you very much for your time.
May I ask
question?
Mr. Howe a question? So I think this is the first time the dispensary folks are hearing about making your business legal non-conforming, possibly. What's your reaction to that? Would you stay in the dispensary business, or do you think you would go for the new rules?
Well, there's a lot about the current ordinance that I like, to be honest with you. I would prefer to stay medical. I like the structure with a couple of changes. I think it would work for me. I just think that, as a collective, or maybe we're no longer a collective, but as a body of people, we still need to be able to do manufacturing. We still need to be able to do cultivation for our own people. So as far as that goes, I'm okay with the grandfather clause.
Okay, and are you able to cultivate within the county?
Yes.
Okay, you're okay with that.
Yeah. But would also like to be able to do it in the city indoor. I mean, that would be very, very helpful. because it's the indoor facilities that are the hardest to find.
And the manufacturing that you're referring to is the extracting of the oil or the essence?
Yes.
That's then turned into medicine or into oil that's used in the edibles, right? And
Yeah.
one of the concerns is about this expression volatility, but there are other businesses in our industrial zone that use ethanol and other substances that might be of concern to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this volatile label that's been put on extraction is a little bit misleading. You're really talking about hydrocarbons and ethanol. And, I mean, right now, I believe the city has a whiskey distillery in the Funk Zone that produces more ethanol in a month than we would ever use in a year. But ethanol is very, very important to what it is that we do, because it's the only way that you can make the full plant extract, also called Rick Simpson oil, to actually treat cancer patients. I mean, that's the oil that's used to treat cancer patients. And so without the ability to make that, it's very, very difficult to do that.
So Mr. Howe, we're moving fast because the Planning Commission, I think, will look at it October 26th, and then we'll look at it before the end of the year. So whatever information you have that you need to get into our 7 brains,
Okay.
please be quick about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Clay Becker?
Madam, sir, madam, thank you for the time. I just wanted to make 2 little quick things that, yes, I think the support of the manufacturing is really important in regards to producing the medicines that people need, and I was just supporting what Ryan was saying about there's some misleading terminology from this volatile to actual hydrocarbons. It would be the same substances and the same sort of equipment if we had a home-based cosmetic business or we were making face creams at Estee Lauder. So all those things are important, and then sometimes there is some misinformation. It's also like when this gentleman was saying about the outdoor cultivation, like you can't do full sun cultivation all year round. You won't get 5 separate cycles in a whole year if you're just doing full sun. So, this volatile thing is really an important component when you're trying to just try to identify specific components that provide those healing properties, and being able to do it in a manner that's compliant and doing like other industries would do. Same technology, there's nothing any different, in the same sort of scientific apparatuses. And
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, I would just,
Sorry.
so the Planning Commission is looking at it October 26th. So
Okay.
again, if you're trying to give information to the decision makers,
Sure.
we need to know what you know.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Patrick, and I believe it's Burse? Burry. All right. Go with that.
How you doing, council members? Thank you for letting me talk. I just wanted to talk about the extraction process a little bit about myself. My name is Patrick Burry. I'm a military vet who was blessed and fortunate enough to go to Westmont and graduated with a Bachelor's of Science December 2016. So this is an industry that I've been looking into. It's one of the fastest growing industries currently actually in the United States. And getting into the extraction specifics a little bit, I keep hearing the word volatility. We call them VCOs, volatile organic compounds. And those are more regarded as like toluene, xylene, methylene chloride, stuff like that, instead of the hydrocarbon chains. Getting into the nomenclature a little bit, that's more of, so toluene, xylene, they form aromatic rings, which are carcinogenic, as opposed to the hydrocarbon chains, which they have much less negative side effects as opposed to those things of the aromatic rings. But even those we see within many industries here in Santa Barbara, even the paint that we lay on the road for things that are being done, such as in carpinteria currently, those all have things, paint strippers and stuff like that. So it's not using the right authorities. It's something that we can work hand in hand in, I think, to get the idea that hydrocarbon chains are very bad and volatile compounds, because they're really not. Some of the stuff that I did at Westmont, we were working with a lot of this stuff, strong acids, sulfuric acid and nitric acid, and I mean, all the benzene. We were working with a lot of that stuff in the research that I was doing with sulfamates, but none of which was fearful or should be viewed in an opinion of being bad. It's all stuff that can help push forward for anything medicinal, as every pharmaceutical company is seeing currently. Everyone's using it, even here in town as well. There's a lot of industries using this stuff, Vertec and Genentech and stuff like that with these companies, New Seal and Carpentry as well.
Need to wrap up, please.
So I just wanted to kind of bring a lot of the stereotypical norms down, and it's not that bad.
Okay, thank you. Damian Martin.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair, Madam Mayor, Councilwoman, staff, public. My name is Damian Martin. I'm a licensed attorney with Greenwise Consulting. Our ultimate objective is to locate clients here or relocate or bring clients to Santa Barbara to conduct cannabis operations. I do this all over the state. In fact, your ordinance draft is off my model. So having said all that, just first quickly addressing the topic of personal cultivation. The terminology conflict is not the right way to describe it. At the state level, the municipalities cannot prohibit indoor cultivation of 6 plants. You can only reasonably regulate it, and you can give more. So rather than giving just 6, you've given 100 square feet. If you want to continue to give 100 square feet, by all means, you're free to do so. You're not in conflict with state law. You're actually just over and above state law. As for outdoor cultivation, you can prohibit it. Therefore, your regulations of it do not need to be reasonable. You can do it, go crazy. Any kind of outdoor odor control, by all means, you can do whatever you want, really, because you can prohibit it. As far as the main topic I want to talk about is this legal non-conforming thing with old businesses. I'm a little puzzled by that. My understanding of legal non-conforming law is it's a land use concept. So as long as you allow the location to be used for its current use, which I'm guessing collectives or some combination of dispensary and cultivation, as long as you can continue to do that, you continue to allow them to do that, you can still regulate their conduct, how they do it. Most importantly, there's state law, and those state laws are minimum standards. You can't say you can be legal non-conforming and do less than state law requires. So what I would do is I'd allow the current uses, but the current uses have to comply with the new ordinance, and then therefore come get a permit under the new ordinance. That's how I'd handle it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Aaron Schulman.
Hello, council people. I'd like to yield my time to anyone who's in support of the cannabis ordinance. Thank you.
All right, very good. Laurel Perez.
Good afternoon. I'm Laurel Perez with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting Services. And as a land use consultant and permit processor, I just really have a question, and maybe Mr. Berman can answer it after public comment is completed. But I read through the entire draft ordinance, and my question has to do, it lands on page 18 of attachment 2. And it falls under the phase 2 of the application process. And it identifies those items that are required to be submitted to the city administrator's office for review as part of the phase 2 process. So I'm on page 18. Toward the bottom of the page, it's a small little 2 number. It states that the applicant shall present proof of required state licenses issued by the state licensing authority as defined in the Business and Professions Code. And it almost seems like a catch-22, because I think at this point, most licensees haven't yet received their state license, not even a temporary license, I don't think, at this point. So maybe this is just a different license that you're referring to. So if you could clarify that, staff, perhaps at the end of public comment. It's just my question that I had. And just a curiosity, in talking about this issue of outdoor personal grow and prohibiting it outright, I'm just curious if there's an estimate out there as to how much state revenue we would not be able to receive if we prohibit outdoor grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And T. Trotter is the last speaker.
Madam Mayor and Councilman, thank you so much. I am only in the extraction business. I have 4 extractors at this point, everything from CO2 to what we consider volatile. Let's talk about volatile. The machines can run on propane. Every one of you have volatility in your yard with your barbecue pit. Every one of them have volatility in their yard with their barbecue pit. Let's not get ridiculous on this. I only want to go for extraction. I think that the fire department should be weighing in on this rather than just the police department. Another thing that I heard is your M zones. All 3 of you know how many M zones are here. It's like a needle in a haystack. All right? I happen to be in one of those, so I know how hard it is. The third thing I'd like to discuss, and it was one word, robust. Robust regulation, robust, robust. What is robust? I know that for Mr. Ryan, he has to provide a security 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you go to Mission Security and ask them what that's going to cost, that's $630,000 a year. That's robust. That'll also put you out of business. Thank you very much.
May I ask, is it Mr. Trotter?
Yes, ma'am.
So would you be willing to pay for fire inspections?
Absolutely.
We need cost recovery on this monitoring. And so probably already you have some safety measures in place to make sure.
I have pursued Seattle and what they have gone through to make sure to adhere to the fire department. It's the fire department's jurisdiction if they consider it volatile or non-volatile. That's who we want to hear from.
So
they're the ones that have to deal with it.
We could suggest to staff that the fire marshal be present at the planning commission meeting, and actually when the city council takes it up. We're just trying to balance safety, public safety.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Absolutely. Not only should the fire department be here and be a part of it, I have always said that every one of us who apply for every license should pay a fee. There isn't anywhere else in the United States that you can apply for a license and not pay a fee. I'm willing to pay for the 4 fees I need. I got 4,000 with me today.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Chair, I would just say from the onset that staff is in fact supporting both volatile and non-volatile extraction methods under the auspices of working directly with the fire marshal, as well as a certified state licensed technician similar to a chemical engineer.
Very good. Thank you. Madam Mayor.
We're done with public comment, yes?
We are done with public comment.
Yeah, just on the volatility issue, I know I was one of the people when it came to council for initiation, and I was concerned about the term, and I think it was a gut reaction. Since then, I've learned a lot, did a little more research, and yeah, it makes a lot of sense of the way it's being recommended. So I don't have that same concern so long as the oversight and the safety mechanisms are already there. So, and I see that you put that in the draft ordinance, which is fine. As I'm understanding what the question about the state, the catch-22 issue, and correct me if I'm not understanding this correctly. January 1st is the first day you can even get a temporary license from the state of California for adult use, and it's up to 4 months as they're reviewing a permanent license process. For this ordinance here for adult use, we would have to have them have that at least temporary license anyway. And in order for them to get the temporary license, the state is going to ask the local authority whether there is authorization to give them a temporary license. So to me, the chain of events would be get the local ordinance in place before January 1, so that way when the state's looking at temporary licensing that everyone has to do for any kind of adult use, that's in place so they can ask the local authority for authorization. We can either grant or deny based on their application, and then they can get the temporary license, which then means they can then apply for our permit process under the ordinance. Is that the order?
That is the exact order
Okay.
that is embedded within the regulatory ordinance in a three-phase system.
Okay.
That three-phase system for the locality starts on or about February 28th, 2018, where the applications are required to be in and then reviewed by staff through the police powers of the city administrator.
So thank you for that. And then just to start conversation and comments up here, moving forward, just to first say, I looked up what did city voters do in Prop 64. How did they vote on this? And just to help put it in context, it was 71.4% voted yes on Prop 64. So I think that, to me, is looking at where our vast majority of voters looking at in terms of the decriminalization of adult use anyway. So there's that balancing act of all the conversations we've had up to now about dispensaries, and I know that that's going to be one of the conversations. I think the recommendation in front of us here has significant oversight and processing. It's not the ability to have a dispensary area is not, or retail is not in the residential areas. I think it having that flexibility, and you're not putting everything in one part of the city, I think is also smart. And I think it was 1,000 feet in between different areas. So, and there's already the state law prohibiting a retail use within a certain area of a school, up to high school. So there's those components there. I know that will be part of the conversation, but to me that made sense. I do question automatically starting a process that would eliminate any option for us to apply for state grants. And so just ask the question, is there a way to regulate good neighbor policies, odor included, about 6 plants outdoors? To me, that might be a way to start, and I totally understand the neighborhood issue. I know we've heard that in other places in the county in terms of neighborhood compatibility, but I'm just questioning if there is a way that we can incorporate some regulations and that would result in us being able to qualify for those kind of state requirements. So,
by the time we would come back to you, staff is more than happy to look at best practices for outdoor personal cultivation and regulatory entities for that personal cultivation, and come back to you at a later time, probably when we meet with council, about what we could do to adequately regulate some of the negative ramifications that would stem from outdoor personal cultivation.
okay. And then there was an issue about pop-up events. I don't know if we're ready for that yet. I don't think this, hey, that sounds fun. But that's not what, this ordinance wouldn't allow for that, correct?
This regulatory code, specifically the regulatory section, would prohibit on-site consumption in a retail setting.
Okay.
So inherently, the restaurant model would not work here in Santa Barbara.
Right. So I would just reply to the person who brought that up. Let us start somewhere and see how things move and not go. I would much rather try to keep things as contained by allowing access, but in a very regulatory way, and then see how that goes, and then be able to shift as we need to. And the whole world about cannabis is going to change over the next 4 to 5 years. I will say, having the final thought I'll say about this particular ordinance and being as leaving options open, but in a regulatory way. My understanding is this would help reduce the level of black market purchasing, cultivation, distribution, because there are avenues for people to do things legitimately and with oversight. And if we squeeze it too hard, then it's just allowing what was termed at the conference the illicit market from continuing to blossom. So that's part of my thought process behind here.
Another pun.
Yeah.
There's another pun.
Yeah, blossom. See, I told you it's gonna. Yeah, I'm getting in the weeds, as they say. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to just, because we have a lot to do in a relatively short time, kind of tee this up. Mr. Klung, could you remind us what the pattern is here? We go from here to where and back again, or is that?
Let me defer to Mr. Wagner. My recollection is that we've timed the Planning Commission hearing, which is required for the Title 28 and Title 30 changes, so that we can make the end of the year.
Mr. Wagner?
The only thing that would be privy to the Planning Commission would be the land use portion. The regulatory portion would have a recommendation from yourself and be potentially adopted in the future by the full council.
Well, that was what I was going to suggest, that we may even bifurcate the effort in the interest of time and getting as much done as we possibly can, and maybe tee up the land use issues before we get into other regulatory issues. What's the pleasure of the committee? Madam Mayor?
Well, I mean, I think we can decide on things today, and one's just going to the Planning Commission, the other, and then that's going to dovetail into everything else to go to council after the October 26th, right? So hopefully we can get through this today. I would also suggest we have a very light council agenda today, and if we need to continue it after the council meeting.
And that's what I was next going to ask, the pleasure of the committee, if we'd like to do a time specific for a continuation.
I mean, maybe unless we can finish it in
we give it a
45
shot.
minutes. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I was ready to make a motion to send this forward to the different directions that it needs to go.
Well, I couldn't vote for this in this current form myself. I've got a lot of questions.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest that we just go recommendation by recommendation, and that way staff can follow your direction in having something tangible to bring back to the City Council and the Planning Commission. We have 4 different recommendations. If we would go recommendation by recommendation, it would help staff follow your thought process.
I am fine with that, and since we also do the land use issue as item A, I think that's, that's because that's, I'm fine with it if that's the pleasure of the committee as well. I'm in no hurry to get this done if we don't get it right. And I mean, we've
been
down this road before many years ago, and it didn't get right, and we paid the price for it. So I'd like to get it right this time.
I did have some deliberative remarks, if I may. I'd like to thank the mayor for taking the initiative to go to the conference and bringing back best practices and what people are talking about in other parts of the state. I'd like to explore the idea of moving the manufacturing option to the airport property. We need to talk about how we would open discussions with the city of Goleta and the county, maybe. Our airport is in the middle of some other jurisdictions, and I know that they would be concerned about that. The map we need to look at, I know some people will be concerned about, we heard quite a bit of concern about dispensaries. There's a concern that marijuana is an evil drug, and not everybody shares the opinion of some of the speakers here today, and so we need to let the public have their say about where some of these facilities might be located. I totally agree with the mayor that we shouldn't lose out on grant monies if we can help it, and if there's a way to regulate outdoor cultivation, maybe setbacks. You can't grow a plant near the fence line of your neighbor. Of course, we should care about our neighbors. And then the utmost in fire and safety inspections related to the manufacturing. I think we do that already with activities in our industrial zone, and it should certainly apply here. And as I stated, we should have cost recovery on all of these activities. So Mr. Chair, I'm looking at the last page on our. Okay, good. You have it up. So this is the first recommendation, Mr.
The
Wagner?
recommendations are actually listed in the front of your CAR.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I would move that we send this one forward, this particular provision, but to come back with more discussion about outdoor cultivation, personal outdoor cultivation. That's my motion.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay.
So I don't know what coming back means, though. Coming back to the council?
To the council.
Yeah.
That
okay.
the council would get a more robust presentation about, how did you call it, Mr. Wagner? Best practices or
Yes, ma'am. I would just suggest that recommendation by recommendation, if you would like to start with personal cultivation, that would be swell. Yes, sir.
Mr. Cullen?
It would just be very helpful for us to be able to keep track, since it is a complex and all-encompassing package. We want to be able to solidify your recommendation to council, so it would be helpful if we just went one by one.
I was trying to go by starting with this one, but let me ask, so they get 6 plants, 3 of them inside, 3 of them outside, 6 outside, 6 indoor? What's the legal interpretation on that? Please, Ms. Ostranger.
Councilmember Murillo, it's 6 total on the property, no more than 6.
Okay.
And if I may read directly from the state-mandated
Thank you.
MAUCRSA, this is in fact the language that's been ratified by the state. Not more than 6 living plants may be planted, cultivated, harvested, dried, or processed within a single private residence or upon the grounds of a private residence at one time. So it is in fact only 6 plants.
Total. Okay.
And,
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Councilmember Murillo, Chair Rouse, remember that the recommendation 1A does affect the zoning ordinance, so that has to get to the Planning Commission. So it's difficult but not undoable for us to do some work on that and come back to you. But I don't recall our publication deadline for the Planning Commission. Did we get that settled?
There should be an exact date. Forgive me that I don't know that off the top of my head.
I heard it from Commissioner Campanella today. It's October 26th.
That's the meeting, but we have to notice that meeting in accord with the zoning ordinance ahead of time. So realistically, we don't have a lot of time to have the committee adjust the zoning pieces of this puzzle.
Mr. Vermont, did you have a specific
I
notice
was just
date?
going to clarify that we need to notice 10 days ahead of the Planning Commission meeting, and the staff report is typically published 7 days before.
Right, but isn't this just the commercial component? And we're already saying outdoors prohibited for commercial. The conversation we're having up here is personal use in the residential zones, whether or not we want that outdoor or not.
This recommendation is specific to personal cultivation. There is another recommendation that would deal with commercial cultivation.
And what Mr. Kalan is, I think, trying to say is that this is found in Title 30, so it is a land use regulation.
Okay.
I guess I was confused just because the CAR and this are in different, there's different orders.
The
so-
language in the CAR and the language
Yeah,
are different.
so, okay, we'll go by the screen. Fair enough. Okay, so,
Well, then I would just suggest that the motion include moving this recommendation here, number 1, to the Planning Commission, right? Because this is the zoning one, and with the direction to review options for personal outdoor use of up to 6 plants per the state law. And because, right, you need to do that all at once at the Planning Commission.
Correct. And then, as I said earlier, staff can come back with regards to regulatory measures to abate concerns with regards to outdoor personal cultivation.
Right, that could come back to council.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So
the
Ms.
motion
Maria, you
is
may-
this plus,
I was just suggesting to clarify the motion that Ms. Murillo made.
I agree.
Okay.
Thanks.
okay, I'll disagree with that part. It just says we intensify the density of our residential neighborhoods and try to stuff more people in, and now we're going to add something that, if it's outdoor, it could be so this, as it's written, I could support it, but I wouldn't support the extra part of the motion. So we can vote on that as you've suggested? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 2-1. Next.
This is the, okay, so this is the other items to come back to council, right? And I don't think there was any, so I'll right, the Ordinance Committee recommended, yes, so I'll make the motion, what's on the screen there, to move those items, Chapter 44 within Title 9, to council, recommend oh, we didn't even talk about a number per individual business category. Can you, is that meaning what? Number of manufacturings, number of testing, number of?
Correct. Right now, in your collective model, you only allow 3 retail collective, medical collectives. We would think it would be in the best interest of the city to develop a number with regards to how many manufacturing or how many cultivators or how many testing facilities, or would you allow the free market to dictate that particular wholesale market?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Murillo, Title 44 doesn't involve the new Title 44 wouldn't involve the Planning Commission. So while it would be great to have your recommendation to the council on the number of businesses, it's not essential. You could work that out at the City Council.
Okay.
So this is just teeing that up for discussion then.
So why don't I make the motion to move these items to the City Council and ask staff to bring back pros and cons of limiting numbers or letting the free market decide, and then let the council figure that out.
Second.
Okay, moving and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Unanimous, pass.
What's the next one?
Okay,
So this is sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this was my question earlier about moving into the zones that we previously had discussed under the medical issue and why we didn't want them in certain zones. So this is of course, under the theory that, distributing this more far and wide lessens the pain on any one location. I can't support that. The airport is an interesting question. If we were to do, for example, a fulfillment facility, as opposed to a retail storefront, which I think is probably a lot more community friendly. I don't know how the FAA feels about that kind of situation, but I'd be interested in that question. So I'll leave it to my committee.
Why don't we start here? Why don't I make a motion, the number 2, which the Ordinance Committee recommends that staff come back to council with the feasibility of the cannabis business being placed in the airport manufacturing zone. I mean, we just need to look into that, right? So it's just opening the door.
And that is opening the door, but we're not able to accomplish that before the December 31st
Understood.
arbitrary deadline.
So that's a 2018
Feasibility.
issue, it sounds like. So, yeah, so I move number 2 as a yes, look at the future feasibility.
Okay, so on item number 2, moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passes.
Can you put the map up? We had a map. Not that map, the other map.
Yes, ma'am.
That map, okay. So the green would be, that's the,
Commercial.
right. And then the brown is the M1, is that right?
Affirmative.
I'm sorry?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, affirmative. That's what you said. He comes from the PD. Well, I mean, he does. Well, we can discuss. I mean, I think we went through this so much with medical when adult use was illegal. To me, there's a difference now with it trying to become a legitimate item that's not criminalized anymore. That, to me, is a key distinction between what we were trying to deal with before and where we are today. I'll just go back to the being able to, along with strict regulations and oversight and safety, giving the flexibility so that the black market or the illicit market doesn't then become the dominant market. So I appreciate, Randy, because you and I were there during the whole process with the medical dispensaries, but I think the state law was a very different thing then. So
State law was different, federal law remains.
true, and that's still
What
gonna
could
be
go
an issue
wrong with
moving
Jeff
forward.
Sessions and Donald Trump? I don't know. But my concern is this, is once again, I'll go back to the efforts we're making now is to infill with residential in some of these commercial areas and do mixed use. And I think that a dispensary by its nature, I just don't believe is a good residential cohabitant. So I would be reticent to move in this direction, especially as we try to encourage the infill of the downtown. We have got affordable housing units, people self-help housing, AUD projects, and I just don't think that is a great mix or idea. So I can't support that.
Well, I'm thinking two things. One, that I know that the East Side residents already have a dispensary, and they probably would like us to open up the entire city so that that marijuana stores could be spread out and be everywhere that they're where they're appropriate for. So this is going to be a good discussion at Planning Commission and at City Council. What will we do? Where will we allow them to be? But the actual motion that we need to make is to move it forward to PC, right, to Planning Commission.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great place to start.
Let me go back to what we're making a recommendation. Forgive me.
But once again, even the argument about spreading it out because of the potential neighborhood nuisance, the security regulations, everything that we do with these dispensaries points to the fact that it really doesn't belong in a mix with near residential areas.
Right, that's why it's in the commercial zones.
But as we make those also into mixed commercial areas, residential areas as well, this is why, like I said, as opposed to the dispensary model, a fulfillment center idea may be the way to go. We already have a very robust delivery. There's that word robust again. A very robust delivery system in town, whether we know about it or not. And we do live in an Amazon-type world. I'm really leaning that. I think that is the direction we should be looking at, as opposed to seeing how many storefronts we can put up.
And Mr. Chair, I would remind you that storefronts and non-traditional storefronts are in fact allowed in the MI zone.
I would agree with you that fulfillment centers is probably going to be a business model that's going to work for a lot of for folks. I mean, they don't need the square footage to pay, for their leases. It's just a different kind of model. That will probably happen. I also don't think, again, I go back to 71.4% of people voted for Prop 64 and don't think a prohibition on retail is appropriate in Santa Barbara. We're going to come back with, staff's going to come back on, do we want to put a cap on it or not, or other kind of regulations. But I think to start that process, we need to move this to the Planning Commission to at least allow it in the zones presented, and then council can then, look at that number in the regulatory component of the ordinance. So,
pleasure to the committee.
And Mr. Chair, I would say too that we have empty storefronts downtown, and it should be part of the discussion. Would we welcome this kind of commerce on State Street? I'm putting it out to the public as well to consider that. What we're doing with State Street is a big topic. We're focusing a lot of energy on it. This is a possibility. I need to hear from the public what they think about that. So this is the part. So we already did 2. Mm-hmm. We need to do 1, and so I move that we send that to the Planning Commission.
Second.
Okay, been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 2-1.
Okay.
And to be clear, for the council on the zoning, whatever comes back from the Planning Commission needs a 5 vote? Yeah, okay.
Okay.
All right, last one.
So once again, my question was, this is still retains the distinction as a medical facility?
Correct, Chair Rouse.
Okay. And so under a medical facility, if there's not a collective, the collective is the only part of the which was always kind of a very interesting distinction anyway. So would somebody still have to have a doctor's recommendation in order to participate in the sale or to purchase cannabis?
Yes, anyone 18 years of age or older would still need a physician's recommendation or a medical marijuana ID card.
Okay.
I would say, sir, the other thing with regards to this particular recommendation is that, most importantly, this brings the existing medical actors into the regulatory scheme that we've created in the other ordinance.
Good. So, and if they, and I think you said this already, if any one of these currently permitted medical cannabis facilities wanted to change into adult use, they'd have to go through, there's no like top of the line, or there's no, they'd have to go through the process just like any other applicant would. They don't have any preferential treatment or anything like that.
You are correct, ma'am.
Okay.
Do the same auditing and regulatory processes exist then for them in the future for the medical facilities as they will for a retail outlet, or is that remains to be seen? In other words, the same kind of auditing, scrutiny, delivery mechanisms, paperwork.
Chair Rouse, the state now with their new regulations don't distinguish necessarily between medical and adult use, so they will have the same regulations and be subject to the same auditing. Just for clarity, the existing 3 would be grandfathered in, for lack of a better term, under what the 3185-250. They would be subject to state regulations, but they would not necessarily be subject to the new regulations, because they would be governed by the amended and then subsequently repealed ordinance.
And I know one's coming on appeal, one's permitted. Do we have 2 or 3? What is the current status?
We have 3 issued permits with one that's been revoked, but that's on appeal.
Okay.
And there's one in the queue that should one be revoked. There'll be an opening, and that could come in.
And the one in the queue would fall under the current ordinance we have until and unless we pass a new ordinance? Is that how that?
So how it would work is once the way we've written it is whatever is issued as of the effective date of 9.44 could continue to exist. So if we only had 2 because the one in the queue couldn't get through fast enough, we'd end up with 2.
But if they wanted to still apply for a permit for medical cannabis, they just would under the new ordinance?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Got it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chair, if I made a motion, would I refer this to City Council or to Planning Commission?
Planning Commission.
Okay. Did you have something to say? You looked like you were.
Well, yes, Councilmember Marrero, Chair Rouse, Madam Mayor, we've got to keep in mind that what's within our reach from a regulatory standpoint may not be in our grasp. So we have another chicken and egg problem here. And that is if, like the accessory dwelling units or average unit size density ordinance, we end up with a tremendous number of applications in January or February. We are going to be scrambling without funding to deal with those applications. So I say that only because I understand the policy drive behind letting the market sort itself out and preventing diversion into the black market. But at the same time, the newness of this business presents a real problem to your staff because we haven't done it before. Our relationship with the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board or regulation is very, very different than what we're looking at. That means that, and explains partly why we are not trying to address the regulatory criteria in a zoning ordinance. So 944 may change down the road, and I know for a fact we're going to need additional resources if the if we're successful with these ordinances.
Okay, so and you're going to come back to the full council on the number and all of that, but as I'm reading this, the permits you have to renew every year, right? And there's a process that initiates every year. So could one option be that in the first X number of years you have up to a certain level, and that could change over time based on, because as you said, next year might be just a whole new world? right? I mean, we can talk about
The
that at council,
regulatory
but
code
that-
accounts for greater numbers in the future after you have the opportunity to see what you're dealing with.
Right, okay. Well, that'll be, but for now, I think we just need to move this over to the Planning Commission, correct? So I'll make the motion to move the item on the screen there to the Planning Commission.
Second.
Okay, it's moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Now, this is the end of your recommendations to staff, right?
Yes, sir. That
Yeah,
that
there-
completes all four. Do you
But
want to
in
look
my
at them?
mind, there's still a ton of issues to deal with, and I don't know how and
Yes,
when
sir.
and where we deal with them. What's the next? Well, I mean, we have things like delivery, transport. We have things that, how we regulate testing, manufacturing, edibles. We haven't even talked about yet. So how and when do we tee all that up?
Currently, in the regulatory form that exists before you, edibles are defined, and a couple other things that you just said are defined as well. What was the other thing that you had discussed, sir?
Transportation, delivery, testing, all those things that are...
Delivery could be accommodated within a non-traditional retail environment where it's delivery only, or according to the MAU CRSA, you could have a retail operator also have delivery. The reason why you want to expressly state that in the regulatory code is so that you can enforce all of the actors that are running afoul of that. If you look at weed maps, there are a prevalence of non-sanctioned actors in the city now providing for delivery.
Bingo. That's why I was saying, how and when do we tee that up? Because I think we've gone over, we basically made 4 recommendations, but for my list, we haven't come close to the whole thing. So I don't know how and when we...
Mr. Chair, I'll second a motion if you want to make one that we take up all those issues at City Council, or...
Just to
Isn't that in the
step
ninth?
back for a second, the right to deliver is in fact expressly stated in the regulatory code that was before you.
The right to deliver? Does that mean anybody has a right to deliver? Does that mean specifically a license to a dispensary? Or is the Uber guy? That's the part I don't get.
Only a licensed brick and mortar facility sanctioned by the city of Santa Barbara that has requested to be seen as a retail operator can be a deliverer in the city of Santa Barbara.
And then, but do we have controls over the delivery the company? For example, is it, like I said, is it the Uber guy? Is it any, I mean, could they have 15 different delivery companies working for them? I mean,
No.
those are the parts that, I mean,
There
those are
are
things that I've asked about before. I'm a little frustrated because we're not getting to those parts of the...
Yes, sir. There are stringent measures within the regulatory code that provide for the delivery entity that you discuss. We can go over those specific pages if you'd like.
Isn't this 9.44 that you're talking about?
Affirmative.
Okay,
Chair Rouse, just for clarity, the way that we drafted the ordinance, it does allow the option for delivery. There are established in the code certain restrictions and regulations, but this code also gives council the flexibility to create resolutions, and also it gives the city administrator the option of creating regulations to govern aspects of operations to protect health, safety, and welfare. But I do agree that there's things that need to be discussed, and we need direction at
Right,
some
well,
point.
it's just, I mean, but on top of that, the bigger crushing issue for me is the thing about edibles, because that is a real societal issue. And if we don't have some kind of outlines or some kind of definition about the manufacturer, type, use, sale, packaging, unless...
Mr. Chair, attachment 2, I think, has a lot of what you're asking for. And in fact, I was looking at the memo you put together.
I was thinking about a more robust public discussion about it, though, because I think that's important. I agree,
I mean, I think a lot of what you're looking at is already in attachment 2. So in terms of the delivery role, the age requirements, the labeling of anything edible, the location of
Correct.
Not the location. I mean, it was in here, just hasn't been brought up by the public because I think.
I just know that from other agencies have suffered from these issues, as if we have here in Santa Barbara. If you like to talk to the emergency room people, they'll tell you all about it.
The helpful thing with regards to this regulatory ordinance is it runs parallel to state regulation. So state regulation will require that retail operators have a consistent, safe, and clear path forward for how they deliver. That will be quite stringent. But in addition to state mandate, this regulatory document provides for a safe, thorough, and robust mechanism in which delivery can occur. I would say that edible cannabis products are expressly stated in the Business and Professions Code, specifically 26001. I'm looking at page 7 of the definition. And then we go further within manufacturing and production as to what that looks like. I would say that there are also stringent guidelines at the state mandate with regards to labeling.
And Mr. Chair, Madam Mayor, Councilman Murillo, this ordinance reflects a regulatory preference on the part of the city attorney's office, and that is, rather than try and assess every micro detail, what we've done is give the city administrator regulatory authority. So the city administrator has the authority to promulgate regulations that will address all of these issues. The council remains in control of that because you hire and fire the city administrator. So on any given Tuesday, you could have a discussion about edibles or delivery, and the city administrator would then use his or her judgment about how to regulate that issue. So I guess what I'm saying is that as cities get into more and more complex issues, we're going to have to accept the administrative law part of this, meaning that some high-level official will be producing regulations that fill in the blanks in the laws. So that's how we've tried to address your concerns, Chair Rouse.
All right, well, thank you. Once again, we don't want to make some of the same mistakes we made during our medical discussions years ago, and I think it's important that we try to get this right for everyone and for the sanctity of the city, and saying, well, we're going to miss out on the revenue if we don't do exactly what the AOMA says. I can't buy that. I can't be a part of that. So we have to get this right. We got a whole community to deal with, not just this. This isn't about freedom. This is about revenue. Freedom already happened back in the 90s. I mean, you can use it with impunity and own it and just not sell it. Now you get to sell it. Great. So let's get this right.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think if I'm understanding the permitting process, it can be appealable to council. Right? Is there an appeal process in the ordinance?
Chair
the
Rouse,
regulatory process?
Madam Mayor, there is an appeal if it's a decision for revocation of a permit, suspension, or denial of a permit is appealable to the council.
Right. So I just think moving forward, there's some checks and balances there that the council can look over, and the council could also direct the city administrator to come back on a regular basis about the level of applications, what's happening, what the issues are, and then the council can give direction to the city administrator on specifics in real, not just hypotheticals, but actual things that are coming forward.
And Chair Rouse, Madam Mayor, Councilman Murillo, the regulatory piece of this is at page 54 of attachment 2. The council, give you a second to get there. And it would be 944-340. If you're concerned about the city administrator doing something stupid or not doing something smart, you can add language there to increase your level of control over the regulatory process if you'd like. And again, this is a kind of a jurisprudence theory thing. When you're dealing with a closely regulated industry, it's really hard to legislate your way through the thicket without ending up with an 1,100-page law. Hence the development of administrative agencies in the 30s when Roosevelt was trying to have some labor law. So what we're building into this ordinance is an administrative law component so that if we're wrong on February 1st about an issue, city administrator is going to be able to correct it on the fly and fast. That's what we're shooting for here. And again, it goes with the uncertainty of this kind of enterprise.
Initiative law. Yeah. Ms. Murillo?
I just wanted to honor Chair Rouse's concerns and, suggest that we have a slide on the regulations related to delivery and edibles. And, I know people use edibles because they don't want to smoke, which is harmful to their health in another way. And, we have child-proof caps on pharmaceuticals. And so I urge people to be very, very careful about these substances. And to have a slide or two on them, it will facilitate public discussion when we come back. And thank you, Mr. Wagner. I can see you all put, and Ms. Ostranger, Mr. Bright, you put a lot of work into this, and thank you.
Okay, so I don't think we have a reason to continue after this afternoon.
We actually did it. Look at that.
I'm not sure we did. Okay. That's a matter for debate. All right, well, thank you. If there's nothing else, we will adjourn. Thank you.